My mother chose my toxic stepsister over me and kicked me out. Now, I'm engaged, and my fiancé's company dropped her husband, which she blames on me. I'm 26 years old and have been engaged to my fiancé, whom I'll call Ryan, for about 2 months. I met him 4 years ago on a dating app, and since then, we've been inseparable. Ryan is my soulmate. He's the only person in my life who has never let me down. My life hasn't been easy. My parents divorced when I was just 2 years old. My father abandoned us without a second thought. He paid child support, but that was the extent of his involvement. He never bothered to check in on me. To be honest, my mother, who is now 48, wasn't a great mother either. When I was younger, she was more focused on her own activities than on raising me. I was essentially raised by nannies and babysitters. As I got older, my mother was still quite young, and her priorities were vastly different. She didn't care much about being a mother and spent most of her time socializing or dating. She was an outgoing person who had little time for me. Even in her career, she didn't take her work seriously. She was a freelance artist who made decent money each month, but she didn't have to worry about me since she had child support checks coming in to cover everything. I hate to admit it, but if it hadn't been for that child support, I'm sure she would have kicked me out long ago. She was never very devoted to me, and I suspected she was just waiting for me to grow up so I could leave her alone. When I was around 13, she started dating my stepfather, whom I'll call Mark, who is now 50. He has a daughter around my age, whom I'll refer to as my stepsister, Lily. When they first started dating, my mother brought his family home to introduce us. She advised me to be on my best behavior since this was very important to her. My mother had brought home boyfriends dozens of times before, but she had never been concerned about how I behaved. Usually, she would just tell me that she had guests coming over, and I would take that as my cue to retreat to my room until they left. But this time, I sensed she was serious about Mark, otherwise, she wouldn't have cared about my actions. The first time I met him and Lily, they were relatively kind to me, and it was a pleasant introduction. I had no idea what was in store for me after that initial meeting. Soon after, Mark began visiting more frequently, and it felt like they had almost moved in together. I didn't mind it. It didn't bother me as long as they let me continue with my life. For a long time, they practically lived together, and Lily would occasionally visit. Her mother was still in the picture, so she spent half of each month at her mother's house. Initially, people were either polite to me or ignored me, which was fine because I didn't really care for any of them. I didn't have much affection for my mother, so it was hard for me to care about anyone related to her. All I wanted was my own peace and quiet, which I enjoyed for a while. But then they decided to make it a permanent relationship and move in together. I wouldn't have cared, but my mother informed me that now that they were moving in, I would have to start sharing my room with Lily. I flatly refused to do that because it was my room. It had been my sanctuary my entire life, the one thing that provided me with calm in that chaotic house. I wasn't going to give up my freedom by sharing a room with someone I barely knew. When I told my mother I wouldn't share my room, we had a heated argument. She threatened to kick me out of the house if I didn't comply. I was only 14 at the time, but I was aware of my rights. I sensed that my mother was the type of person you couldn't truly trust. It was also basic logic. I knew she couldn't just throw me out until I was an adult without facing legal consequences. So, I told her that I knew she couldn't do it and that she was bluffing. She was frustrated but ultimately had to let me keep my room and decided to convert the basement into Lily's room. It wasn't a terrible place to be, it wasn't as nice as my room, but my mother worked hard to make it more appealing and livable. By the time she was finished, it looked as good as any other room in the house. I didn't understand what the big deal was, but for some reason, that's when Lily started to dislike me. It could have been because, on the day she moved in, my mother gave them a house tour. It was preferable to being her enemy. The saddest part was that I had done nothing to deserve her hatred. She was simply offended that I didn't want to share my room with her. It was a ridiculous reason to despise me so much and try to ruin my life. My room was my safe haven, and with a mother like mine, I don't think anyone can blame me for wanting my own space. Besides, if any of them had ever made an effort to get to know me, I might have considered sharing my room with her, but she was a stranger to me, and I didn't feel comfortable giving up my independence for her. I never complained to my mother or Mark because they were well aware of the situation, and it felt pointless to do so. They didn't care if I was bullied. I could have been tormented my entire life, and they would still turn a blind eye since I wasn't important to them. So, I had to endure it and let her walk all over me. I would fight back occasionally, but I quickly realized that it only escalated the conflict. Our parents would intervene, and I would end up grounded because they despised me. Jess would often cry a little to escape trouble, but I couldn't cry on command like her, and I wasn't as manipulative. So, I was the one who faced the consequences for my bad behavior while she got away with everything, and I was left to deal with the fallout. It was a miserable environment to grow up in, and I loathed my existence. When I was finally kicked out around my 18th birthday, I felt more relieved than anything else. I had endured my family's chaos for years, and being expelled only made things worse over time. Jess continued to be a nightmare, and our parents backed her without questioning her actions. In those 4 years, she had managed to turn our entire high school against me, and I had only a few friends who would even talk to me. Everyone else despised me simply because she did, and that was enough justification for them. It took a toll on my mental health, and I was struggling to keep up in every aspect of my life. I had gained a lot of weight from binge eating, which severely affected my appearance. I was overweight, acne-prone, and had pretty awful hair. I was also trying to maintain my grades, so not only did I look terrible, but I also appeared to be dumb to everyone else. I had nothing going for me and was at an all-time low. Things at home were no better, as I still had to deal with Jess and my parents. My mother had grown increasingly irritable and would constantly compare me to Jess, despite the fact that she was the one who had made my life so much worse. Things were terrible before my mother married Mark and they moved in together, but they weren't as bad as they were now. Yes, it was awful that my mother didn't care about me before, but after her marriage to Mark, I went from the frying pan into the fire. She went from not caring to intentionally making me feel horrible about myself. It felt like I was living with mean girls at home. It was clear to me that Jess was the daughter my mother had always wanted. Life had dealt her the wrong hand, and she was stuck with me. I knew they both wanted nothing more than for me to leave, and to be honest, I wanted to leave too. My mother and Jess despised me, but Mark didn't care. I had no relatives to turn to other than my mother because my grandparents didn't communicate with us. I had never known my father, and I knew nothing about my other grandparents. I actually had nowhere to go and felt awkward approaching my friends for help. So, I had to tough it out and stay with my mother to ensure I had a roof over my head and food to eat every day until I turned 18. But then, a few weeks before my birthday, an incident occurred that led to my expulsion. It was a weekend, yet I remember it like it was yesterday because it was one of the most terrible and stressful days of my life. We had both recently graduated, and Jess had started hanging out with a larger circle of friends. She had a buddy whose brother was in his senior year of college, and she was dating him. So, she and her friend would hang out with his pals, who were all older than us. I knew exactly what they were up to, but I didn't think it was worth bringing up with my parents because, with my luck, it would only backfire. So, I never told anyone that she had started drinking, and while I couldn't prove it, I suspected she was smoking pot and doing other things. I was never interested in any of it because, first and foremost, I didn't have friends cool enough to have access to alcohol, cigarettes, or drugs. Secondly, I was already struggling, none of it belonged to me, and I had no idea how it ended up in my room. But she didn't believe me. She lost it when I suggested that Lily might have planted it in my room to get me in trouble. She began yelling at me, claiming I was always jealous of her and that I would never be as good as her at anything, which was why I was trying to shift the blame. By that point, I was crying uncontrollably, but she didn't seem to care. After a while, she stopped shouting and told me I needed to leave. I had no idea what she was talking about, so I asked her where I was supposed to go. She told me she didn't care where I went, she just wanted me out of the house because she was tired of dealing with me. When I refused to leave, she threatened to call the police on me. She added that since I was almost 18, they would take the drug allegations very seriously. She didn't want an addict living with her, consuming all her money and resources. I had to fend for myself now because she was tired of pretending to be a happy family with someone who deserved nothing. I pleaded with her not to force me out because, while I wanted to leave, I knew I had nowhere to go and didn't have enough money to support myself. But my mother didn't care. She informed me that if I didn't leave that day, she would call the police and report me herself. I was shocked that she could be so cruel, and even more so that neither Mark nor Lily said anything to defend me. They were literally going about their day as if nothing was happening. After a lot of crying and begging, I finally started packing my belongings. I would gladly choose to live on the streets over being arrested for drug possession. I finished packing by the evening, and as I left the house, no one said goodbye. I never looked back. I went to the park and sat on a bench for a few hours, but it got pretty cold, so I decided to go to a friend's apartment and spend the night there, hoping they would let me. I went to my best friend, Sarah's house, and asked if I could stay with her for a few days. She already knew how my parents were, so I didn't need to explain much to her. When I told her about what had happened that day, she was horrified. She said her parents could help me if I allowed them. I had always urged her not to tell anyone about how my parents treated me, including her parents, because I wasn't sure if anyone would believe me. I guess I felt awkward revealing such sensitive information about my life to others. But that day, she insisted I tell her parents, who were as appalled as she was. They called my mother and tried to speak with her, but it didn't help. She was quite unpleasant to them. They realized that talking to her wouldn't make things any better. Then they did something for which I am eternally grateful. They promised me I could stay with them for as long as I needed and that they would help me. They were well off, so money wasn't an issue, and Sarah adored me, so she was willing to share a room with me. I spent the next few years living with them and attending community college, which was the only place I could get accepted due to my poor grades. I began working and saving money to buy my own place, but Sarah's parents made sure I never felt pressured to leave their home and did everything they could to make me comfortable. Then, roughly 3 years ago, I finally saved enough money to move out. I was proud of myself and incredibly grateful to Sarah and her parents. I honestly couldn't have done it without them. Even on the day I moved out, they were the ones who helped me settle into my new home and told me I was welcome to return whenever I wanted to visit or even live with them again. That was the turning point in my life. By then, I had lost a lot of weight, and my health had improved significantly. I felt and looked better. I was also earning enough money to support myself and had worked hard to improve myself, so I decided to start dating as well because I wanted to get married someday and needed to start looking. I met a couple of guys before Ryan, but those relationships usually fizzled out before they could get serious. After meeting Ryan, I fully understood why it hadn't worked out with the others. Ryan and I were meant to be together, while the other guys I met were just there for fun. When we first started dating, I had no idea he was wealthy and the heir to his father's company. I just liked him because he was funny and cute, and he seemed to like me too. After a few months of dating, he told me about his family, and I learned they owned a restaurant chain that he would inherit. My mother chose my toxic stepsister over me and kicked me out. Now, I'm engaged, and things have taken an unexpected turn. The timing of Jess reaching out was suspect because I had recently announced my engagement on social media, and I knew she must have seen it. We attended the same high school, so someone must have told her about it. Everything felt off, so I decided to investigate. I discovered that the man Jess was married to owned the company that supplied plastic containers and other items for takeaway orders to Ryan's restaurants. It was easy for me, all I had to do was create a fake profile to stalk her husband. From there, I went to his profile, where he disclosed everything about his work in his bio. I already knew a lot about Ryan's business because we had planned to run it together after his father retired, so I was learning the ropes. When I realized who he was dealing with, I immediately alerted Ryan. Over the past few years, I had done my best not to think about my previous life since I just wanted to move on. I didn't follow anyone from my family online and had told my friends not to tell me anything about them. I had no idea Jess was already married and had been for a few years. But when I discovered that her husband was actually interacting with us, Ryan and I decided to cancel our arrangement. It was already costing us a lot of money, and I didn't think I could ever do business with her again. Ryan also informed me that the quality of the products delivered by her husband had significantly declined, and they were considering dropping him as a supplier anyway. They were in talks with another company that offered lower prices and better products. Last week, just a few days after I received Jess's email, Ryan decided to meet with her husband and cancel their contract. For some reason, Jess believes I did this on purpose to get back at her, and she has been accusing me of it in her emails and social media posts. We haven't spoken in nearly a decade, but she still thinks I'm holding a grudge against her, which I might be, but that's not the real reason her husband lost our contract. She posted a few days ago that many of her clients had already dropped them, and this was the final straw. Yet, she maintains that I did it out of spite and that it was unprofessional of us. She tagged our Facebook page in her post, and things have gotten pretty ugly. I feel awful for her because, according to her message, she and her husband have been losing business left and right. Okay, I'll admit that some of this was personal, but much of it was business as well. I doubt Ryan and his father would have dropped her husband as a supplier based solely on my word. Nevertheless, I feel terrible for her. I'm not sure if I should have made my fiancé quit working with my estranged stepsister's husband. Update 1: Ryan has spoken with his father's lawyers, and they believe we did the right thing. We're pursuing legal action and asking that they remove that message. We are also filing defamation charges against them because the guy charged us a fortune and delivered products that fell short of our expectations. If we could get a better offer somewhere else, we'd obviously go there. It's just a coincidence that Jess is married to the guy who runs that firm. Instead of improving their company's operations, she chose to trash us on social media. It's ridiculous that I allowed myself to feel sorry for her after everything she put me through, but you all truly opened my eyes, and I appreciate the support. Update 2: Ryan and his father filed a slander claim against Jess and her husband a few days ago. We'll meet with a court-appointed mediator in a week. In the meantime, my mother has taken it upon herself to protect her poor little stepdaughter yet again. It's so silly, I feel like I'm back in high school. But thankfully, I'm not back in high school, so I can simply disregard what they say. Unlike then, I don't need to be in my mother's good graces to have a roof over my head. She can cry all she wants about it, but nothing will change. She has been trying to contact me for the past few days since Jess was served, but I've simply blocked her and moved on with my life. I don't need that kind of negativity around me. I'm engaged to the man of my dreams, and I don't need her or her crazy stepdaughter back in my life. Update 3: So, let me quickly fill you in. We won the defamation lawsuit. It wasn't even that difficult because my father-in-law's lawyers are absolute sharks, and they took Jess and her husband down. Maybe now they'll focus more on their business and meet their clients' expectations. They had to pay for what they said, and we were able to strike an agreement, so that's over.